All righty then. I will call this meeting of the Alternative Energy Committee to being to order. We'll take a roll call. I have Mike,
Yes, here.
Linda,
Here.
Denise,
Here.
and DJ is absent. We have a guest with us today, Sherry Quirk. Why do I do that?
Many people do.
And we have a guest on Zoom, Millie Burrows. Millie will bring you in during the hearing and open discussion portion of the agenda. Let's move on to approval of the minutes for March 18th. And on the agenda, I need to correct that to say not March 18th, not March 28th, 2025. Has everybody had an opportunity to read the minutes?
Yes, I have.
Are there any amendments, any questions?
I don't have any.
Seeing no questions, can I get a
Motion to accept?
motion?
I move
Yes,
to
thank
accept.
you. Motion to accept, so
Second.
moved. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nay? Okay, it passes. Thank you very much. We have, don't really have any committee matters that were moved forward from the last meeting that I am aware of. Would anybody like to add anything for committee matters to the new items for our agenda, and we can discuss it later?
No.
Nope. Okay.
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
I think starting last week and going forward, the various state agencies are holding hearings and comment sessions on the energy siting bill, and you might want to have that on as a continuing item of discussion.
We did talk about having somebody from the planning department come and tell us what they know about it. So that I think it is on our radar
Okay.
still.
Right.
Yeah, I would imagine it's heavily on your radar.
Perfect. And I do have it as an item of new business to issue the invitation to the planning board for our June meeting. But we could probably move that back up into committee matters just as a forward motion going forward.
Whatever you think.
Perfect. Why don't we go ahead and move into the hearing open discussion portion of our meeting. Millie, if you decide that you want to be heard, if you could put up your hand and notify us. We have a couple of items of discussion for this particular meeting. One is we're going to just start with some discussion around the proposed new solar bylaw, the BDOD, before the town meeting. The second is to continue discussing the state legislation around permitting and funding for interventions. And then we plan to have a little bit of a workshop among our committee members on a survey that one of our former members had drafted. And we plan to try to chop that up a little bit so it could be finalized and administered in pieces. So those are the three pieces that we will have under hearing and open discussion. And again, Millie, if you would like to ask questions or anything during that portion, please just put your hand up and we will recognize you. Any questions at this point? Perfect. Why don't we start? I wanted to bring up the BDOD, the proposed new solar bylaw, one more time before the town meeting.
And can I just interject
Yes.
that I'm not participating in the discussion, but I'm sitting here taking notes.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. We appreciate that you can do that. So I read in the newspaper that the planning board has recommended that the solar bylaw, that's new solar bylaw, the business overlay district, be approved by town meeting at the next meeting. And I just, again, I wanted to bring it up in case anybody had any other questions or any more ideas about that, or has heard anything more about it since the last time we met. As I mentioned in our last meeting, we as a committee will not be posing an opinion about this one way or the other. But we are very welcome as individual citizens to stand up during town meeting and state our individual opinions as individual citizens of the town. It's not really within the purview of our committee to do that, so we're staying away from that. So that's my opening salvo on this. But any other discussion on this? Any questions we have? Any
I'm
other
just curious.
information?
Do we know if the planning board had any input or thoughts about whether the Attorney General's office would find the bylaw acceptable?
I wasn't able to attend the meeting. Do you have any insight on that, Sherry?
I was at the meeting, and I think there's certainly a hope that the Attorney General will find it to be acceptable. I think another sort of related question is, with the activity under the new siting law on solar and battery storage, will this new solar overlay zone be acceptable to the state?
Yeah.
Or will it be considered to be a limitation on what the state might otherwise authorize? And I listened to the first session on the new siting law, and I heard one thing said that maybe was of some relevance, which is a desire on the state's part to give deference to municipal zoning where possible. But it was enveloped in a discussion where it was hard to say, well, this is absolutely going to be okay, or this is definitely not going to fly. So maybe a little bit of encouragement, but I think that's also an issue.
Yeah, we heard last meeting from a member of the public that, I think conditions that protected the health, safety, and welfare of town residents would be maybe more tolerated than other restrictions.
That's interesting. There is going to be a public hearing on May 5th where sort of standard conditions for health, safety, and welfare, and some of the issues that come up in solar and battery storage proceedings are going to be discussed.
And is that what the state?
Yes.
You said May 5th?
May 5th, yeah.
I've thought about this a lot since the business overlay district came up, and I recognize that it's a attempt to kind of corral solar into a specific area so it's not so spread out around the town. And there's a real interest in being able to do that. And all that being said, if the owner of the properties in that overlay district decides not to develop solar, then it becomes self-limiting. If they choose not to make that decision about their land. But my understanding also is that our existing solar bylaw parameters will still apply. So even if we limit it to that piece, it still has the limitations on size, on siting, on all of the limits on tree cutting, and the way that the facilities have to be kind of walled around so that they're not so visible from roadways and so on. I mean, that was part of the work that we did in the solar bylaw committee back when we were crafting at the beginning, is where we do have solar, trying to put some limits on it trying to make sure that it is able to kind of suit our town surroundings, and not just a bunch of big black shiny object sitting around. So it'll be, I think it will be interesting to see if it passes the town meeting. And also, if it would pass muster with the state. There's no way to know until we do it. I don't think. So, any other discussion or thinking around that at this point?
It sounded to me like a lot of people were really confused about it last time. And I guess maybe with better explanation and more time to ruminate, maybe a different result will be reached. It's hard to know.
Yeah, I intend to read the new language. I understand they've revised it. I have not yet read it. But I will before town meeting. But it will be interesting to see if it becomes more palatable in its newer form.
Sherry, when you said last time, you meant at last town meeting when it was, I don't know if tabled is
Referred
the
for
right term.
study.
It was referred for
Yeah.
further study. Okay,
Right.
yeah.
There are really only two changes in it. And it's has to do with the types of facilities that can be built outside of the solar overlay district. Two of the permitted categories have been removed, but otherwise it's the same. The disturbed areas and the public utilities.
We'll see what happens. Do we have, is there, are there any questions on the Zoom that you can see?
Let me double check. Nothing right now.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to the next item? All right. So, Linda, if you'd like to rejoin us, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for continuing to take notes when you're not able to participate in that part of the discussion. I wanted to move back into discussing the state legislation that was recently passed. We've been kind of kicking that around from time to time, and I'm wondering if anybody has heard anything more with regards to the preventing or funding for intervention beyond what we had last discussed. I'm not aware of anything else coming forward. With all the federal uncertainty and funding being pulled by the feds, I'm really wondering how much of that agenda is going to be able to move forward, because as I recall, a fairly significant amount of it was contingent on the BIL funds and the infrastructure funds that the feds had originally had in play, and now that's all been pulled. Existing projects are having their funding pulled. So I wonder, I know the state has some resources, but I wonder what the stance of the state is going to be moving forward around this agenda. Lots of legislation gets passed that never gets funded. So has anybody heard anything or read anything recently with regards to that?
The question I had was about, will there still be a preference for environmental justice communities? It feels like that's going away.
Well, it says both environmental and justice in it, so it's probably not allowed.
There is a certain.
There are words you
Bitter note
can't.
of
There are words
experience.
that can't be used anymore, and it comes way too close to the language of DEI.
Yeah.
And I've seen lesser offensive words like methane pulled out of things recently because it's considered DEI. So
Climate change.
literally, methane is considered DEI language in applying for funding. You can't use the words climate change or climate.
Apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, you can say weather though, that's okay, still, for now.
There seems to be a lot up in the air. I mean, one thing that I wonder about is with the tariffs, where are the panels gonna come from?
Yeah.
Where are the batteries gonna come from? There's some production for both in this country, but predominantly they're made overseas, either in China or, you know, with another
Southeast
country as the intermediary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of hard to figure out how this is all gonna go. And whether, and the state is really strapped, I think, for money.
Yeah, that's where I wonder, I do have the feeling that the state may have to put a pin in this for 3.5 years or 4 years until
Forever.
or until the climate, until the literal climate, the political climate changes. You know, it's too bad. I mean, I sent around some articles to you all, one of which mentioned that in March of 2025, for the first time ever, alternative energy sources were the source of more energy in the United States than fossil fuels. You know, so that agenda to try to diversify our grid and make our electrical grid more diverse and less reliant on fossil fuels hit its peak. And I truly wonder if we're going to end up backsliding or if they'll be able to continue pushing forward the projects that are already, you know, spade in the ground, you know, and far enough along that they're going to be coming online anyway. It also makes me wonder about the current projects that we have around here. Whether or not the developers are going to want to move forward with them, considering the costs and the circumstances around that are going to change for them as well. So, you know, there are a lot, that feels to me like there are a lot more questions than there are answers around this at the moment.
Well, so I got a couple of thoughts. One is that, you know, the permitting part of the state legislation, the permitting reform is, I don't see that costs them anything. Now, whether the energy activities or not can go forward is another question. But I did recently see a presentation about the state's involvement in offshore wind, which of course the administration has said they're not going to permit anymore. But there are a couple of projects still in the pipeline. They're still moving forward because they have their full suite of permits. And the state is still committed to doing what it can to meet the goal of decarbonization. So, you know, whether that's wishful thinking in the current climate, or so to speak, or whether, right, I mean, I think it's a really good point to talk about the tariffs for Chinese products because, yeah, I mean, the state is certainly moving forward on a number of fronts, and offshore wind is just one of them. But yeah, I can say that they're at least talking as if they want, you know, offshore wind will continue and they'll continue to seek opportunities to make progress.
Well, I also wonder, you know, some of these companies that are doing these projects may have made their commitments to materials and had it onshore in advance of the tariffs, especially knowing they were coming. I mean, you know, there was a lot of talk about it before it actually happened. And I know of people in other parts of I know people that I work with in my professional endeavors that heard the talk about tariffs and made it a point to get materials that they had ordered here before the tariffs descended. So, you know, I think there are a fair number of businesses that have done the same and could be in that same sector that they have, but I haven't seen it reported yet. You know, I know what I've seen where I work, but I haven't seen it reported in the other sectors yet.
I read something today about how Ireland has exported many multiples of the usual amount of goods that it exports. Within the month of February, it was many multiples. And people just said, they're coming, we don't know what they will be, but let's let's ship everything overseas that we can.
Right.
And if that were to happen for solar panels and batteries, for example, then we wouldn't see an issue with the tariffs for a while.
Well, and I also wonder if, so I don't understand how they roll out, is if they have been bought and paid for and they are on a ship crossing the Pacific as we speak, will the tariffs be on the landed goods, or will they have been imposed before they left port? You know, if they're in transit, but have not yet been received, but have been paid for, you know, it could be that people prepaid to try to avoid tariffs. I wonder if the landed goods will be subject to the tariffs or not. I don't.
My understanding is
I don't
it's
know that.
literally the person who's receiving the goods who has to pay the tariff.
So that wouldn't help them at all.
So it's not even a case where the producer, it's the purchaser in the United States that pays the tariff.
Well, I guess that wasn't, if it wasn't if it hadn't already been landed goods, they're
Yeah.
still stuck with the tariffs.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know how complex the shipping world is, whether you can, you know, whether, like the shipping manifests are all like baked in for 6 months, or whether they can have quick reaction. Honestly, don't know that much about that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because certainly, I would say the offshore wind stuff, because there's so few, such a limited capability that some of these projects are like scheduled out for, you know,
Years in
the actual
advance.
construction is
Yeah.
years in advance, because that's there are only a certain number of vessels available.
Well,
I'm not
and
saying shipping is like that, but
it's also been the way of international trade in the last, you know, couple of decades, that people are more and more looking at just-in-time delivery in their supply chains, because they're until 3 weeks ago, there wasn't any real reason to try to storehouse things. Anyway, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these whole sectors are affected. But, you know, and it's not as if there are domestic manufacturers to replace this immediately. That's, you know, and granted, this administration has no interest in doing it. But you look at states like Texas that have enormous solar fields. And one of the biggest ones in the world is in West Texas. And they just brought online another big component of that. You know, my understanding is they're siting it on land that was pumped dry of oil out in West Texas. So, you know, it's giving the people who had oil exploration and exploitation another source of revenue on that land that's no longer viable for oil. So, you know, it does make me wonder how big projects like that intend to continue expanding are going to manage it. But these are all things I guess we won't know.
and it could all change at the drop of a hat, drop of a tweet.
As we've seen.
What time is it? Has the market dipped yet today?
Yes.
I have the New York Times. I'll let you know if I get a breaking news alert.
Yeah. Let's see.
No.
Anyway. Well, stock market's down, anything could happen. Anyway, so I guess the whole point is many of the components and the physical parts that make up alternative energy and development of alternative energy as we know it in this country are kind of up in the air right now.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing to think about. If the state is committed to the goals and in one leg of one aspect of the effort is cut off because of maybe lack of solar panels, or solar panels that are too expensive, how will the state pivot? I don't know if it can pivot. Will it pivot? And I think the other thing that's interesting to think about is if that happens, where people are not going to want to either complete projects they've already proposed or suggest projects that, in some ways, for the people who didn't want to see more solar in town, that sort of suits their, and it gives us maybe a little time to, I don't know, think about something else.
Well, it does make me wonder if efforts like this business overlay district that the town is proposing, or other efforts to create the superstructure for these things to sit on in our town, this could be the work that we do while we're waiting for the opportunity for the actual infrastructure to happen. And the pieces to solar or wind or geothermal or whatever those things are that need to be created. But creating the bylaws, creating the understanding in town, understanding what the demand is. So we'll turn our attention to this survey that we've talked about for over a year. And maybe now's a good time to be getting that out while it's on people's minds. And survey the town to find out what they're interested in. To the degree how many people already have solar or geothermal or some kind of wind capacity in their properties, what the interest and tolerance is for the town. So I think maybe this is a good moment really to be looking at that. But if we as a community can think about, okay, we may not be able to be building infrastructure to support alternative energy at the moment, but we could be planning for it and be looking at how can we create I'm calling it a superstructure, but the commitment and the understanding in the town so that when the time changes and we're able to turn back to doing these sorts of projects, we're in a better position to both review and approve or disapprove of a particular project, or again, open the door to other sources of alternative energy that we haven't considered here much, like geothermal, which hasn't, it's being tested in other parts of the state. I don't know how viable it is here, but it's something that could be looked
I
into.
don't think it's viable here, but I think that's what Tom Bickey said.
Is it?
I think so.
I know he was, Tom Bickey gave us a great education on why it's not a good idea to put solar panels over cranberry bogs. I don't know if you were here for that meeting, but
I was.
yeah, that was, it's, I miss his institutional knowledge, but but there are, again, there are continuing to be interesting things developed in this arena. And even though we may be at a pause where projects can actually move forward for a while, in the scheme of things, 3.5 years isn't that long. I know, when every week feels like a month, but 3.5 years isn't that long, and it could give us the opportunity to help the town build a plan, a structure to lay that upon, and really think about how we would want to invite movement in that arena when the time is right. Does that make sense?
It does. I think this wouldn't necessarily come from the survey, but another interesting thing to figure out would be, what is the state's idea of going forward with the transmission and distribution upgrades that are really necessary for a lot of the solar projects that have been discussed or even approved. What's going to happen with that? Because that's really a necessary prerequisite. And so I think that'd be an area to explore. But I think this survey is a really good idea.
Well, I also wonder, and Sherry, I'm going to ask you this just straight up because you know way more about this than I certainly do, and maybe Linda and Mike, you have ideas too. But would I know the state has a desire to do this, but aren't the utility companies themselves invested in doing a lot of this upgrading of the transmission and distribution lines? Or
So I will cynically
I'm not really sure how that works.
I will cynically say that every dollar they invest in the grid is an opportunity for them to make a return on that dollar. So it's if you look at this cynically, everything that they build, whether it's ever used or not, is the basis, literally the rate base for a profit. So I think the tricky thing is, one of the tricky things is, it's going to be very expensive to build out the grid. in the way that has been proposed. And, you know, I think we all experienced last winter when our utility bills came and they were through the roof, how quickly it can be that the state just makes things different in that area. So I don't know what the state is going to think about the cost of transmission and distribution upgrades at this point. But I mean, my working assumption is that notwithstanding whatever may be at play or might be possibly changing, we should assume that the state's going to do everything that it says it's going to do, and just work within that world. And if it's different, as it always is, then we can make that adjustment.
That makes sense.
I
We
know
have a
there's a question,
question, I
but
think, from Millie on.
But just for a second, just to,
Oh, sure.
I know that, you know, the utilities for their infrastructure are facing sea level rise, so some of the substations are actually below ground. At least I know they are in Connecticut, so they're spending a lot of money to lift those above ground. And at least, and I think in this state too, the pressure to not have the power go out as we become more reliant on it, and so all the tree cutting is another thing. So I guess what I'm saying is the utilities have a lot on their minds when it comes to the grid infrastructure and its security and its capacity.
As I said, I was looking at it probably from the most cynical point of view.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not saying they did any of that altruistically. I think some of that was the delay,
Yeah.
the power outages. I think at least in Connecticut, they were getting fined for the amount of time the power was out.
Yeah,
We have a question from our attendee. Let's let Millie talk. Millie, did you have a question?
It's actually, can you hear me okay?
Can you hear?
Yeah,
We can't hear you.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see if I
Thank
can
you.
get is that? There you go. Can you speak again, please?
Sure.
Okay.
My
there
screen
you go.
went blank, so I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not. So more than a question, it's a comment. I'm involved with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and one of the things that we work on is legislation federally. Right now, the push is to try to work on permitting reform. And so I subscribe to a variety of newsletters and get bits of information here and there. So I just wanted to share one that came in on, let's see, I forwarded it to a friend on April 4th, and I just copied the blurb. It was out of the Climate Exchange newsletter. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that one. It was the results of a study that ISO New England conducted, and it was the analysis of offshore wind as it relates to transmission. It talked about relocating possible points of interconnection further south from Maine to Massachusetts to reduce necessary upgrades and transmission costs. It also said that if correctly cited, roughly 1,200 megawatt wind farms, and so that would total 9,600 megawatts together, could operate simultaneously at full power without the need to construct new transmission infrastructure and without supply and demand imbalances. So it was just a little bit of good news I wanted to share that's related to the topic you're discussing.
We will always welcome good news, Millie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, that's, you know, it's going to be interesting to see in the next year or so how much momentum that's already gathered around this kind of thing is going to be able to continue, and how much will be stopped by funding and material shortages. I do hope that the tariff thing will work itself out in the next 6 months to a year.
So does my portfolio.
Yeah. You know, one would hope that they'll be able to do that, but there's just been so much uncertainty at this point. But it's nice to see a bright spot around, um, the analysis of the offshore wind, and interconnectivity. I mean, again, it feels like we've made so much progress on so many of these things, that it will be a real shame to let it go. And I think that there are enough businesses and enough individuals in parts of the states that have a vested interest in making this happen, that I think at least it may go forward more slowly than hoped, but it could be, an opportunity for innovation. You know, it could be, this is where MacGyver thinking may come into you know, somebody may come up with homegrown solutions to some of these issues, that could work. From my hand to God's ears.
Assuming research and innovation continue.
Yeah, even if it's in somebody's basement. Anything else on this for now? I mean, I like that we have a continuing discussion about what might be going on, and we'll make that a part of every meeting. Let's move on to the to workshopping the draft energy survey. So I actually just brought it on my laptop, and Linda was kind enough to forward it to me because somehow it got lost in my inbox. But I was thinking that, you know, we all agreed that it was way too long, and that we needed to think about how we might want to break it up and also kind of reconfigure some of the questions to make it a little easier to understand. So I have one hard copy with me and I have it on my laptop. But I was thinking that maybe we could workshop this together a little bit and just like agree on what smart breaking points would be. And then also think about, I think it needs to be broken into at least 3 parts, but maybe more. And what I'd like to see is, we could create the survey and then I'll talk to whoever we need to talk to at the town and ask how we can administer this. What's permissible on how, is there existing infrastructure in the town to administer surveys, or would we be allowed to put something like a Survey Monkey link on the town website and, you know, maybe get a hold of the
The town has done a bunch
newspaper?
of surveys, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't be a new.
Probably
effort
some,
for
yeah,
them.
I mean, there's Google Survey, there's there are like a million different programs to do it. But let's focus on content, and think
Do you
about,
have the ability to put it up on the screen?
would we have the ability to,
If you join the Zoom and you present,
oh,
it can
perfect,
go right up on the TV. So
perfect. Why don't I do that?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
This is a total sidelight. Does the town have a policy about using the AI companion on Zoom calls? Because if we started using it at work, it's really useful in terms of, it's not perfect, but it provides a nice summary of the meeting at the end when you're done, and whoever owns the meeting gets it. Do you know if there's a policy about it?
I don't know myself, but that's actually super useful. So
Yeah.
I'll
I've
look into
noticed that the transcript that it's generating, whatever is generating that, is really accurate.
Yeah.
It's picking up some really intricate words.
I will say, now that I think about it, the one flaw to AI companion versus where you have 4 people in a Zoom is that it actually will attribute statements to people because they know who they are. But in this case, they don't know who we are. It's just a group of people, right? So it wouldn't be able to attribute a statement or like a task to someone like the online one does, but it would get the gist of things.
So I am going to, let's see. Sorry, my email is blowing up. I had an op-ed published in a few newspapers in Connecticut today, and everybody's all excited about it. Let's see. I'll share my screen. I love technology.
Alrighty.
All right, so, I'm gonna make this a little bigger.
Yeah, you got the slidey thing in the bottom right. Good.
Okay, oops. I have the
Well,
wrong,
that's the agenda.
wrong document. Let's try this one. Let's try again. There we go. That's the one we want. So, so we had, when Tom originally came up with this, we had some questions around current utilization. So what are people currently using? And so a number of questions. I'm just gonna run through it fast and then we'll come back. So we had we had the renewable energy utilization, that word, utilization. And then there was a specific piece around wind turbines. There were questions about commercial solar fields, residential solar panels, hybrid or electric vehicles, alternative heating systems. So those were the major pieces that he broke the original survey around. And in the interest, everybody close your eyes for a second. I'm gonna roll back, so don't get dizzy. So you know, we can work on the why we're conducting this survey, but let's look at the first section, because to me it felt a little long. I- For those of you who are more into the current marketing situation than I am, is there a sweet spot in the number of survey questions for something like this in
think
terms
it's
of the
like
number
9.
that you should have?
Oh, really? I mean, 9 choices or 9 questions total?
9 questions.
Yeah, so we've got, 10 questions in the first one. So,
Well, we would lay this out differently.
yes, of course,
And so it would look like a little block of options for
Right.
the consumer to answer.
right,
So it wouldn't be this complicated
right,
in the end.
right.
Can,
Yes,
so I just want to take a little step back and just think about what information we want to get out of it. Because if I recall this version, there's sort of a certain amount of like, are you aware of versus are you using? So there was a certain amount of like checking whether people were aware, and I think also sort of there was an attempt to kind of inform people in the form of a question. Like I think I just saw one of the questions was, are you aware that the state of it is actively promoting large scale solar panels?
right.
It's an interesting question, but is that the kind of question we?
And do we care?
Yeah, do we care? So I think we've evolved a little bit, or I mean, or
Hmm.
maybe we continue to evolve as a committee. I think at the point where Tom put this together, we were still sort of like, okay, there's these different things
What do
we
we
could
wanna
do.
know? Yeah,
Are we informing the public about energy options? Are we, there's a variety of directions. So I think it's important, at least for me, to say, if we're trying to get at current energy usage or current alternative energy usage in the town, and also awareness of alternatives. Or,
Right.
I don't know, I think if we think about, I think we should put some thought into the reason we're doing it and what we hope to get out of it, and also who the target audience is.
Yep.
The target audience is landowners, homeowners, everyone, people in town, people outside of town.
right. Well, and it also brings me back to thinking that we need to break this into multiple pieces. I think it would be interesting to ask people what they know. What is your current, what is the town's actual level of knowledge about alternative energy? Are they aware of, I mean, honestly, I don't know what a green energy consolidator is. Honestly, that was his first question when Tom created it, and I haven't Googled it yet, so I still don't know what it is.
I think we have one. I think the town has signed up to one, isn't it? That energy consolidator that
Is
that
that
the
what
town
it,
uses?
is that what they call that?
Well, I think there's an option, you can sign up to
Yeah.
pay a little bit more and get only green energy.
Oh, okay.
Like the
There's-
electrons matter, but
The big thing that they advertised is that we have an aggregator.
Right,
And I think sort of in the smaller print, you can pay more for green energy.
right.
And well, I could get into detail here, but that's not helpful. But I find there's some things missing up there. that-
What's missing?
I don't really see anything that to me says heat pumps.
Yeah, there's a whole section on heat pumps at the end.
there is
Actually, there is solar hot water heater and electric heat pump here.
and actually, you
That's-
can get a heat pump water heater too.
Right. Well, yeah,
Those are, I mean, it looks, to me, it's weirdly grouped as if they are things that come together and they can, but
well, and that's, I mean, I think that was part of my interest in kind of putting our heads together and thinking about how do we, do we want to ask all of these questions, first of all?
What we could do
Yeah.
is set this up so there's some baseline questions. Do you have solar panels on your roof? Or do you have any of these things? And if somebody answers yes to any of those, then they go off in one direction in the
Right.
survey. If they answer no to all of them, then clearly they have a different level of understanding.
Right,
And it's conditional logic, so we could,
here we go. So this was, I think, Tom's attempt at going off into that direction. If you have residential solar
Mhm.
panels, then you would complete this section. And again, the way this is laid out is a little confusing and we haven't looked at it together in a while. But I think you're right. It's like you could have a jumping off point.
Yep.
If you answer yes to part C, then we could even have it set up a survey that it automatically directs you to that next set of questions.
Mhm.
Um,
But going back to Mike's issue, why are we doing this and what do we want from it? Do we want to know whether an educational program would be useful to the town? If that's the case, then I would think that the questions don't need to be so complicated.
yes.
And that actually makes me think of something, because I think one of the things that prompted this was when we had input from the fire departments, was that they literally do not know how many houses have solar panels or in-house batteries. But in order to figure that out, we would have to do a systematic
Right. That would
survey.
never work for random.
No, right, you wouldn't, so I
mean, it's,
I just thought about that, because it would be interesting it's certainly interesting to know. There was a part of me also that thought, boy, if we could estimate the amount of power we're already producing that's alternative.
well,
that
I
would
have a
maybe be an
question. I mean,
argument for
can you can't you can't put a new roof on your house without a permit. I mean, if you're gonna have residential solar installed on your roof, don't you have to pull a permit with the
you
town?
do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right,
that's-
so
But-
how is the fire department not aware of how many, if they're pulling permits for it, how is the fire department not aware that the town is issuing permits for solar on rooftops?
I
Or are
can't
they
speak for
just
the
not
town, but
communicating?
That depends upon sort of somebody asking the question, the ability to pull that information and then to transfer. So, I mean, I don't know if the planning department, if the
building
inspections,
inspector.
if they make like a GIS layer that they could then transfer to the,
All the permit stuff is on, it's a database that you can access.
Yeah, it's a matter of public record, isn't it?
Right.
huh,
I think that the rooftop solar may be something that could be found out.
Well-
But it's the batteries that I think they're less clear on.
because there isn't any requirements right now. There's no code. Is that right?
I think there may be, but may not be rigorously followed or easily seen. But we should really verify this.
Yeah.
And I'm going off of old memory. and would be better to be verified.
Well, I mean, you know, we've talked about getting a member of the planning board to meet with us at some point. I think it might be also really smart to converse with the building inspectors and ask some of these questions. You know, do we know how many rooftop solar units are? And pose some of these questions in advance and ask if they would either be willing to communicate with us via memo if they don't want to come to the meeting, or come to the meeting, but we will have asked some of these questions in advance so that we can advance our understanding of what exists in the town. Because having that point of reference, I think, would be really useful.
And that's a much better way to get the information than by doing a survey of people who choose to respond.
Right.
Right.
I mean, determining interest of people for
Yeah.
continuing to have rooftop solar. Or finding out if people have considered rooftop solar and then decided not to do it, why they didn't. You know, what are the reasons why, but beyond cost, there are reasons why people choose not to do it. You know, I think that would be interesting kinds of questions to pose to people, but in terms of trying to determine what already exists in the town, you're right, I don't think we should be asking the public that.
Right.
Although, you know, the question could be, do you have rooftop solar? And then have some of these questions around, are they ground-based, are they leased or owned, and so on. Those are questions we could ask an individual that has that has answered the survey.
We could, but if we could get that information from the town, I think that would be better.
Yeah.
Better quality data.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what we can glean from that, because that gets to this aspect of the survey of how much alternative energy is actually being made in the town, or how much is it, what percent. I know in my neighborhood, there's an awful lot of solar panels in my neighborhood. I don't know about yours, but
Yeah.
certainly.
A fair number of mine, and a lot of the people in my neighborhood own vacation houses. They're mostly family homes. They're not like weekly rentals or anything. They're rented for the whole summer or for the month, or occupied by family. But so we don't have as many solar panels, I think, in my little section in Pinehurst as there are in other parts of town. But I think it's because of the nature of the neighborhood.
So something did just occur to me so we have solar panels, and if I had $1 for every time somebody knocked on the door and said, "Are you interested in solar panels?" I'd be like, "We already have them." They often, sometimes they'll go like, "Oh, huh, that's funny. I didn't," and I think they're using aerial maps, so they may not have an exhaustive. So I would think if you were trying to find houses that don't have solar panels to sell them solar panels, if there's a matter of public record where you could go and look and see which houses don't have solar
It's
panels.
easier to pay some kid $2.50 an
Yeah.
hour to knock door to door.
Why don't we find out what the information the building department has?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then move on from there. If they have information that would help us understand how many houses have solar on, and we know how many houses there are in the town.
Yeah.
Right. And if there are it might be interesting to find out where the concentrations are too, where the largest concentrations of homes, and then also thinking about commercial. How many commercial buildings in town have solar? So I think that's a missed opportunity. Yeah, is there anywhere in Wareham that has parking lot solar?
The Y has some.
The YMCA does? Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. I
Yeah.
have clearly not been to the gym in way too yeah, they were putting them up, I think, when I was doing physical therapy
I
there
actually
last
don't
year.
know if they're grid interconnected yet. They put a lot of solar there. And actually, I think we talked about that they also have battery storage in a shipping
big
container,
cabinet,
right? It
right.
did the fire department say they have one of the firefighters said they have a bunch of water or something.
Right, that's right.
That's they're literally just a big tank of water. No, I think this is a really interesting thing to find out. I mean, I don't know, is there a way for us to formally request it, or can we just one of us can call the building department, or?
I think an email would probably be, like, we have these questions. you know, we would, we're trying we're interested in creating a survey of people in the town about their knowledge of alternative energy, but specifically to solar. Can you give us information about the number of residential rooftop solar? Do you know how many how many home-based batteries there are? You know, or can you estimate that? And what else would we want to know specifically? How many businesses?
If we could get locations, that would be ideal, even just street names.
So that actually begs the question of if we, if we say we had a list, aside from sort of just dividing the number of houses by the total number of homes in town, would the town permit a targeted survey to people who already have installed systems? So some of these questions only apply, if we're interested in asking them, they only apply to people who have chosen to have solar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the town, maybe the town has a restriction. This is, it's a public document, yes, but you can't call somebody up and say, hey, I saw online that you have solar panels.
Well,
Can we do it, and can we target a survey? So we have a lot of questions about, we have a question, can we do, you know, what's the procedure for doing a survey in town as a town committee? And can we target?
I can't
Can we do a
imagine that
targeted survey?
they would allow us to do that.
No.
Or how would we get the contact information?
well, that's
Well, if it's so it,
Off the building permit, I suppose.
well, that's what I'm
Right,
thinking.
and
The
you said
building
it's a
permits
matter
are
of
all
public
filed
record.
online. They're probably all have an email attached to them.
yeah, but I wonder,
But I wonder how many of them are gonna be,
builder.
if it was the contractor that pulled the permit, or if it was gonna be the individual homeowner. Probably the contractor is my guess.
Yeah.
And
But that it would be for a specific location, but
Cor-
that's all we would know.
Chris, might be interesting to talk to like the largest contractor, like whoever the biggest, is there a, you know, one or more big contractor, a big, like Solar Run or whatever that does solar, and talk to them and ask them what's their, you know, what parts of town
Yeah,
seems to be,
we are
mean-
looking for the same information that they should have.
right.
But if they go to your house and ask you if you want solar, then
yeah,
they
Yeah.
don't.
can't
They may
tell you
not
how
know
many
either.
times.
So my thinking is that if we're looking for data, we should get it from the building department. If
Right.
we're looking for opinions, then we should do a survey.
Right.
Yeah,
You ask people. Yeah, I don't know, you know, I don't know how we would be able to target to individuals, because even if the building inspector had information on who pulled the permits, my guess would be most of it would be contractors,
yeah,
because contractors usually pull the permit.
right.
At
Sure, you
any
said
rate,
you had a.
I know Sherry has a hard stop. Are we keeping
do.
you?
I probably need to go.
We don't, I'm trying to be mindful of your time.
Thank you.
There was another item on the agenda that related to Sherry's.
Yeah, there is. Do you have a minute?
A minute, yes.
Literally a minute, and that, I'm gonna suspend what we're doing right now and move to new business. And that's item B of new business, and that is the possibility of Sherry rejoining the committee. We're gonna ask it straight up. Is there a possibility that you would be able to rejoin our
What do you
committee?
guys think?
Please.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay.
If
We
you
vote yes.
all in favor?
Jeez.
Can I vote twice?
Yeah, you can vote for
DJ's not
DJ.
here.
DJ would say yes, I'm
yeah.
sure.
Perfect.
So this is
Perfect.
what I'll do, because I can't guarantee that I will be reappointed.
Oh.
I will submit after my term is up,
Okay,
or whatever it is at this point, I will submit a volunteer application, and then we'll see what happens from there.
and we will request that you're able. We will ask them if they will let you rejoin us.
Your opinion will be sought as chair of the committee.
What is the timing of that? I only ask because I'm going to be, I have a business obligation for our next scheduled meeting, which would, if
When is your next scheduled meeting?
it's
June, May.
May,
Whatever the mid-month Tuesday is.
Yeah.
May 20th.
Right, and then we have another one scheduled
we-
in June for the 17th.
I was worried that we wouldn't have a quorum, but actually, if we have a quorum with three, then
Right,
So
then as
that
long as
necessarily
DJ
wouldn't
can
cancel the
join us,
meeting.
I think we'll
Okay, so
be
I'm a little
okay.
less, like, oh, it'd be great to have Sherry, so we can, you can still meet without me.
Okay, perfect.
I will be in Europe at that point, but
Ah.
I can dial in.
Oh, my goodness, don't
You'll
do
be in Europe, so will my daughter. Dang, baby.
I'm going
um,
on vacation.
Perfect.
Are you
Well,
coming back?
yeah, we would love to.
Will
well,
they let
maybe
you back
can-
in?
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you
Good
could come back in
question.
for our June meeting if you're in town, that
I will
would be
be back
fantastic.
in June.
Perfect. So the June meeting is June
17th? Okay.
Yeah, I will be here for that, but I suspect whatever, if there is a July meeting, that I would,
Yeah, July,
I wouldn't
I
be
think,
here.
I think at some point we talked about maybe
Yeah,
suspending meetings for a couple of months during the summer, but we'll talk about that next week, next meeting. Okay, thank you very much, Sherry.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Sherry, very
attending
much.
today.
Good
We
to see you.
appreciate the depth of knowledge that you bring around the
Thank you.
subject. And also keeping my meandering meeting style on track. I'm gonna turn us back to the, what we were talking about, and in the interest of time, because I know
okay.
there are a million things that most of us would rather be doing, but
Since we interrupted, there is one thing, so often at the top of a survey, you'll see request for demographic information. Right, how old are you, do you want to, do we want any of that information? Do we maybe want to ask age?
and give a spread.
And give a spread, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah, we're
Yeah, I hate moving up the age.
yeah. But,
Yeah.
yeah, over 65, that just kills me these days, but I've earned it. Well, I think it would be interesting to ask those questions to get a sense for, because if we can connect people's interest with their age range, that might be interesting.
We might treat, say, if it's going to be open to anyone on the website, we might treat a response differently depending, if you're 17, say, than if you're
Right.
And then
37 or
assuming that
57.
we're using some kind of reputable service, like a Survey Monkey or something like
Right.
that, they have canned demographic questions, so
Right.
it would be asked properly.
Right. Yeah, they have to
So,
be asked.
yeah.
I think the only little hiccup is that's like potentially PII,
DEI.
I know PII, personally identifying information.
Information.
So whether the town has any, like, okay, you can ask anything you want as long as you don't ask
we'll
anything
ask the
about
town.
that person. So that's
Yeah.
one, but yeah, I think we should think about whether there are demographics we would be interested in.
Well, I think it would be interesting to ask the age range, and also, I mean, looking at almost everything on here, if you're talking about having something in your home, it would be fair to say, other than asking their opinion about alternative energy, it would probably be fair to say that people own their homes. But it could be that a person is renting a home that has solar panels on it.
Right. And that's a different level of decision making, more than likely. So
Right.
we wouldn't necessarily want that person's opinions.
Although it'd be interesting if again, if we have a sophisticated enough survey instrument where they click off, is the home you're living in, does the home you're living in have solar? Yes. Then it asks the solar questions.
Yeah.
If you rent your home,
it goes a different direction.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's like, do you as the renter, reap the benefit of having does it lower your electric bill? How, maybe ask how that works. I mean, it might be that next level of questions that we could ask.
But would it be useful if I went through this and put it into one of those forms? Because I do that.
Do you do that?
Yeah.
I know I, for one, would be grateful if you have the time to do that, and then we could look at it again the next time we go,
Yeah.
the next time we meet. But I think we're all in agreement that some of these questions are not useful.
Yeah, do you want,
Let's pick out an example.
yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of wordsmithing here and order choice that I would improve,
Yeah.
but I
Um,
think the first question is basically sound.
yeah. Yeah, although, again, if we're explaining green energy consolidator, I think
Yeah.
a small explanation of what that is.
What we
might
could
be
do, a
useful.
lot of them will allow you to click on it.
Right, like a little bubble.
And a little info box pops
Right.
up.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
If that's something we could do, I would think, and I could, if you'll format it in a like a Google survey or whatever you use, SurveyMonkey, whatever, I would imagine the town probably uses the same or similar kinds of survey instruments when they do one, so hopefully it wouldn't be additional work to move it, but I think
Right.
Well,
one
I think we should find out because
fi-
it
I'll
is,
make a
find out.
it is
question.
hard to
Would
move
you
between.
find out?
Yep.
Okay, so Lydia's gonna find out what the town's procedure for doing a survey or what their preferred software is and then set it up.
Mhm.
You are a goddess. I said that on the record, on Zoom. So, and then you have this electronically, but I also, I do believe it's, that it is too long. It's like, okay, you have these things. If you don't do it, what are your concerns?
Mhm.
I think that's good. I
Yeah.
think it's interesting.
It's not really possible, Linda, for you to redline it when you,
I could do that first.
I wonder, like, I mean, yeah, I'm tempted to just like edit, but I don't know if that's
Can you scroll down further?
in the
I don't
context
remember
of
this at all.
public hearing.
It seems like some of the questions were about you and your house
Right.
and your car and your habits. And
Right.
then other questions were about
How do you feel
global
about?
issues.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And let's
It's like
do those
questions
as
3
separate,
and
separate
4
things.
and 5 are very pointed about
Yeah.
what what are your concerns around renewable energy?
And I mean, like 4 and 5 here are really kind of, I think the word would be leading.
Yeah, and yes or no aren't really appropriate. It's not enough to explain. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, I'm not concerned.
Well, I guess, I think that if we were gonna administer these questions, they should be a separate survey. That,
Yeah, and actually, before Linda puts in a lot of effort in terms of turning it in, if we can get the information from the building department. So
Right. Well, and I will volunteer to,
Okay, good.
within the next week. I'm gonna time bind this commitment. Within the next week, I will reach out to the building inspector and ask if we can get this information and then ask the questions, how many rooftop solar, how many batteries, what parts of town? Can you give us information about the number of businesses that either have or are in the process of doing it? And then, even invite them to join us if they'd like to come and join us for a discussion about it at the May meeting.
It would actually be kind of an interesting project since there are aerial photographs of the entire town.
Right.
Somebody with a lot of time on their hands or a classroom full of students could have them just look for.
Right. So
solar
I
installations.
will make the commitment to make sure that I reach out to the building inspector. I'll try and do it
Great.
tomorrow if I can. Once I do, then I will email the committee and let you know what I hear.
Okay.
And then I'll also reach out and communicate with you when I do, if I hear answers. And we'll be ready to report that out at the next meeting.
Mhm.
I'm trying to stay in compliance with the open meeting laws
Yeah.
around sharing information between meetings,
Right.
but,
And I think we can share information, we just can't deliberate on it.
right, okay,
Okay.
perfect. Cause I, you know, that's the downside of trying to do things at meetings versus what we can do
Right.
in between.
Yeah.
When it's not just individuals. So yeah, if we can share the information between here and there, just so we can push this along, that would be great.
Yeah,
And then, you know, I think the commercial solar field question, again, there's that it's a very heated argument in our town. There are people who are very you know, in favor of it, and there are lots of folks that are not. So and some of the questions in here are questions we can have answered, like how many current solar fields are there in Wareham and where are they located? We can get that from the building, in terms of the information itself.
yeah.
We can get that from the building department, on the town planning. So, but, you know, asking how people feel about solar fields, I think is still a valid and, you know, question. You know, ask, but just not in the same survey.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the challenge of, I mean, it's sort of the challenge of town government where, you know, how do you figure out the will of the people? What do the people want?
Mhm.
And town meeting is supposed to be that instrument, but it's an imperfect instrument for knowing what people want.
Right,
Depends upon who shows up.
right.
Um,
And how they feel about, how they're predisposed to feel about an issue.
Yeah, but this will also not be sort of it's not going to be sort of scientific. It'll be, we have to think about the usefulness of the results, knowing it's just
It's limited to the people who will answer things like this.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
but it's more than we had before.
right.
I mean, you know, I think that any information is information, and getting the right kind of demographic information about people. You know, maybe a question about, do you attend town meeting?
Mhm.
You know, something like that, just to get a feel for whether or not these are people who are not, who are really involved in the life of the town, or people
Right.
that are just interested in answering questions about this.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, it would be great to make sure, I would love to have more of an educational component to what we're doing, and like make people aware of what alternatives are.
Mhm.
You know, and I like this baseline for finding out what people already know, or how much
Right.
is actually having. Because once we get these surveys together, it would be great to create some kind of report. Here's what we found out.
Right.
You know, rather than just discussing it in our meetings, maybe create an article for the newspaper, or ask them to come in and attend our meeting, and write an article with the results of these and what we're thinking. You know, I mean, just to help. We had at one point had talked about even doing some kind of a brochure or whatever, but getting this information and getting an idea of what exists in the town, and then being able to share that with people, I think would be important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to think about is if we say we're to discover, we ask the question like, what's your main concern? And someone, so I think the parallel in the offshore wind world is the concern that offshore wind development surveying is contributing to the death of marine mammals, for which there is
No evidence.
no scientific evidence that
There is no
that
evidence.
there is, and that there's not even a reasonable connection between the two things.
But there's a lot
it
of
is a
conjecture.
persistent, there is, and whether people genuinely believe it or whether people are, because they have other agendas, are pushing it. So I guess that makes me think, you know, if some kind of result like that came out of our survey,
Mhm.
like what's our approach? If we choose to go the education route, like how do we educate?
Well, that is a bridge we should cross as we start to get to it. But you know, again, making our findings, whatever we find out, public is education.
Yeah. Yep.
Inviting people to join us. Thank you, Millie. Inviting other people to join our meetings and hear what we're discussing is education. You know, I mean, I just think that the whole reason why this group of people came together to form this committee is because we're interested in thinking about and maybe pursuing what our little town can do to use alternative sources of energy to be a vibrant community. And, you know, the interest has always been not only to see what's available and help to push the town toward alternatives, but also to keep what makes Wareham Wareham. You know, keep our town our town. So
It's an interesting question, though. How do you structure something like this so people don't respond with inaccurate information that other people take as the results of a survey? 10 people said that they don't like offshore wind because it kills marine mammals. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden then it has some weight to it.
well, I also think that as we publish results from something like this, one of the things we could do is append our findings with articles like
About reality?
about reality.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know, the perception seems to be X based on the findings of our survey. The scientific reality is Y. You know, these studies that are underway are proving. I know we have 4 or 5 things going on just where I work that are studying exactly that. What's the effect on marine mammals? What's the effect on bottom fishes? What is the effect on the fishing industry? You know, everything to do with offshore oceanic wind on the East Coast. We're also doing one with some of the big offshore units off of, I think it's Denmark. There's a gigantic one off of Denmark or Sweden. There's a big solar wind installation there, and so you know we're looking at the difference between how they're doing it and what we're doing off of the East Coast. You know, so these are studies that have been ongoing, but they're beginning to have findings. They're beginning to communicate papers. So, in addition to sharing whatever people's perception is that we identify from the survey, we could think about appending that result or report to say, here's what people are perceiving. Here's some evidence, not necessarily the contrary, but here's evidence around this question. You know,
And I think
and that's the best way to counter misperception. If people will actually read it, but you know, that's all we can do.
I think I mean, as I think about the potential timeline for this survey, I think this discussion illustrates that it's challenging to write a good survey. We have to think about, you know, are we leading people, you know, even a question like, why do you not choose to have solar on your house? If you give people a bunch of check boxes, then you're already you're planting the answer in their question, right?
Yeah.
You're steering people. So I think we should allow ourselves time. I mean, we're not in any big rush. I mean, it'd be nice to do it, but I don't know if we're in a.
I think it's better to do it right.
It's better to do it right than do it wrong.
Because we can't do it over.
Right. And I also think that doing it right now would be a mistake. Even if we had it all together, the same uncertainty about the world that we were talking about earlier is affecting the people who would be responding to the survey. And
Exactly.
they're all saying, well, I can't do that, all the tariffs.
Right. They couldn't afford it. But again, this gives us an opportunity to prepare and refine it. So, so action steps on this. I will contact the building inspector and ask our questions and see if I can have a conversation with them about it, because there may be questions that should be asked that they'll know. It's like, have you thought about this? So I will contact the building inspector and see if I can get that conversation done within the week. And then I'll communicate what I find with you guys via email.
So we can't deliberate. So if you can inform us that
I
that's
can
happened.
inform you that this is what I heard from the building inspector.
But I couldn't then write back and say, okay, based on that, the survey should be mostly about knowledge and not about do you have things installed? Because we're gonna get all that information. That would be deliberative, right? Because it would be
Correct.
essentially,
You can't,
Because I'm thinking
I
about-
can tell you, but you can answer, can't answer.
so what,
No, I'm kidding.
can we in the meeting sort of set up an
Yeah.
if then, so that we say, if we can't get that information, then the survey should also include this sort of, the informational part of it.
Right,
Or maybe, as we said, we'll do more than one survey, and the first survey is about trying to collect that
the
information.
level of knowledge of what's available in the town.
Yeah,
Or,
versus
or what actually
attitudes.
is available in the town. And then the other question is more about what people think.
attitudes, yeah.
Right, right. Because I mean, really, when people are being surveyed, it's not, the more interesting questions to people who are respondents tend to be about their attitudes
Mhm.
rather than about facts.
Right.
Do you own a car? Do you own a house? Do you have, it's what color did you choose to
Yep.
buy your car? Or,
Right.
it's it's the flavor of the questions that make people interested in answering them.
Mhm.
I will
Um,
say that, like if I get invited to take a lot of surveys at work. If someone says it's a 3-minute survey, then I'm just gonna do it right then.
Right,
If someone says, oh, it'll be about 15 minutes to half an hour, I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta figure out a time to do this. So
Yeah.
there's a virtue to brevity.
right.
Yes,
There's a sweet
there
spot.
always is.
Yes, Lord knows I'm not very good at that, but that's okay. Okay. Well, so the action items here, just in terms of how we're gonna proceed, I'll contact the building inspector. I will communicate what I learn to y'all. And then based on that communication, Linda, you'll have a better sense of which way to
Right, and if
push
they-
the questions.
If they don't have information that would be useful at all,
Right,
then we'll focus on what do you have and
right,
that sort of information.
right.
If they have something, then we'll go more down the opinion path.
Yeah, I mean, I know they'll have something. They'll be able to tell us probably total numbers in town, and probably give us some idea of what kinds. I would imagine there's a fairly rich amount of information that's available.
A time frame might also be useful.
Oh, that would be
Did-
interesting too, right?
Did people stop installing after COVID? Did people
Hmm.
stop installing solar after some incentives expired?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm,
So I'm gonna make a suggestion that I did talk about redlining. I don't think it's necessary. I think you should use your judgment and just say, Tom gave us this idea. And I don't feel any need to,
Wordsmith this?
to know if you decided G was not an appropriate one,
I think, yeah,
right? I think you should start de novo.
yeah.
Okay.
I think.
I think that's simpler.
Well, and given your experience with creating surveys and administering them, you have a better idea of how to craft these kinds of questions. So I think that makes sense.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give myself an action item because as I
Yes.
think I've said before, I
It's
have
about time.
That's right. I know everything. That's why I love coming here.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a niece who works for a green energy. Remember, I was texting back and forth,
Yeah.
Right.
forth with her. I'm going to ask her this question about, any potential changes to this state policy or actions based on the tariffs and based on the current political climate
Right.
and the citing bill to get a feel of that.
That would be great.
I can do that.
Well, so I feel like we can kind of move forward because in the interest of brevity, I'd like to get us out of here fairly soon.
Sure.
Do we want to do anything else on the survey for now? Or do we feel like we have enough to keep moving?
I think we're
Are we
good.
good?
I think so.
Okay. I'm gonna move on then. We've already talked about the possibility of Sherry rejoining the committee. Yay. The other thing I just put in the new business was you know, consider issuing an invitation to the planning department to join an upcoming meeting in June, but why don't we make that, why don't we, I'd like to ask somebody from the building department if they would like to join us in our next meeting. And especially if we're able to get some information about them, because they will surely be able to provide us with way more information than we know. And being able to ask questions that I might not think of in a conversation that I have with them, I think would be useful. Would you like for, when I
Sure,
contact them, to ask if they
they're
could join
willing
us
to,
either
yeah.
for May or June?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, because we don't know much about, like, I don't know much about their capabilities in terms of GIS layers or other things that might inform some of our discussions. Like we were saying,
Right.
are there all the solar panels clustered in one part of town or something?
Right.
The sunnier side of town.
Right, on the sunny side of the street. So let's make that invitation. I also, so we'll ask the building department to join us, hopefully in May, or in June, or provide a memo. So some kind of information for us to consider in May or June. And then, I don't have any other new business.
No, I did, so are you saying in place of the planning department?
Yeah, I'm thinking,
Okay.
I think the building department makes sense. Also, the planning board person that I would have asked is probably not gonna be available for a while. Carl Schultz is who I would have asked to join us, and he recently lost his spouse.
Mm,
So
Oh, yeah, I saw
I'd like
that.
to give that a little time
Yeah.
before we do that.
sure.
It occurs to me that the protocol may be that you let the town administrator know that you're looking for information from the departments.
Oh, okay,
I'm not sure about that, but
okay.
just
I'll
in
ask.
case, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
true, it
I'd
might
re-
be outside of working hours or something.
Probably better to ask permission than ask for
Mhm.
forgiveness in this.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Plus, if he knows that we're looking for information, then he's their boss, so.
Yeah, the other thing about, I was going to say, if the planning department was coming in, was to think about what questions we're asking the planning department. Or the planning board. It says planning department. Did you mean planning department or planning board?
Okay,
I think we were talking about the planning department because we were looking at permit questions and how the citing law was going to affect.
so is the building department and the are they the same department?
No,
They are
I think they
different.
work together.
Okay, I know
But
that
I'm not
there's a
sure.
planning board, like a planning
Right.
committee, and then there's the building inspectors, you know, the
Yeah, it's
building
inspectional
department,
services.
but inspectional services, but
It's almost like theory and practice
yeah,
in my mind, isn't it?
again,
I like
It's the
that.
theory.
right. So I'll start by contacting the town administrator and asking who I'm gonna call, and then move from there. And then he might also have a suggestion for whether we want to ask the planning department or the planning board. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
You can
sense.
kill two birds with one stone by asking the town administrator about the survey, if there's survey protocols that we
Right.
need to be concerned about.
Okay. And I promise to get this done in a time-bound manner. I apologize for my recent inability to get things done.
Oh,
I'm
it's
gonna
amazing how 4 weeks goes by.
And
very
we're
quickly.
grateful that you stepped up to be the chair.
Yes.
I'm gonna stop sharing that document. So at this point, is there any other new business that we want to bring up before I ask if we're willing to adjourn this little party?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We are done.
One of the Concom members would always say, when it was time